Five, four, three.
Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the Norman Manley Law School's Legal Aid Clinic, Legal Fair. My name is Kayan Bali and I will be your moderator for today. I'm one of the attorneys here at the clinic and also the senior tutor. Our topics today treat with sustainable development and aging. And our first presenter today is Mrs. Janice Robinson Longmore. And I will now invite Mr. Jonathan Alpucci, a student here at the Norman Manley Law School Legal Aid Clinic, to provide her introduction.
Good morning. Mrs. Janice Robinson Longmore is a chartered financial analyst and comes to us with a wealth of knowledge and experience in business transformations, investment and pension fund management, commercial banking, and regulatory compliance. Mrs. Robinson Longmore has worked in several senior management roles in banking operations, auditing, treasury, pension fund, and investment and mutual fund distribution in Jamaica and Canada. Mrs. Robinson Longmore has both a Bachelor of Commerce and an MBA in Finance from the University of Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Mrs. Longmore serves as a board member of the Pensions Funds Association of Jamaica. We welcome Mrs. Robinson Longmore as she addresses the theme, Combating Old Age Poverty, Sustaining a Livable Income. Thank you.
So thank the Norman Manley Law School for inviting me to do this presentation, for inviting the Pension Industry Association of Jamaica to present. Our CEO, Sanya Goff, was invited. She was unable to attend, so I'm here in her stead. So I hope I'll do her justice. So I see the audience in the room today, and average age here is probably under 30. I would push it up a little bit. And when I was your age, people mentioned pensions, and I kind of just rolled my eyes because it was, it would never happen. Today I'm 60. So it's happening. I'm going to start out by just telling you some interesting fun facts. To save enough to get you a pension of $30,000 US per year, assuming 5% inflation a year and an investment return on your funds of 6% and your earnings today of about $50,000 a year, right? 50,000 US a year. That would mean that you would need to save at least, if you're now 30 years old, you would need to save at least $1 million US to earn yourself a pension of $30,000 US a year. $1 million US is a big number. That's why people always say you need to start early. Another thing that's interesting fun fact is our inflation in Jamaica, our inflation rate is about 5% a year. You hear that and you think, yeah, that's nothing, right? Well, 10 years ago, for me, it was not that long ago. An inflation rate of 5% per year for every year means that at the end of 10 years, your purchasing power declined by more than 60% in that period. Because what you do is you times 1.05 for the first year, that's the increase in prices, times 1.05 for the second year, and you go on and on until year 10. That gives you a reduction in your earning power of 60%. Another fun fact, most people, maybe 95% of people now entering the workforce, when they enter the workforce, if they get into a pension fund, which is only 20% of our labor force in Jamaica, 80% of our labor force are not registered in any pension fund at all. So assuming that you get registered, you're lucky enough to get registered in a pension fund, it's going to be a defined contribution scheme, which means that our plan is whatever you put in is whatever you get out. And that money that you get upon retirement is not going to change. My father is now 94 years old. That means that he has lived and is still living 34 years past my age. So what that would mean is 34 years ago when he retired, whatever money he got in terms of a pension, he'd still be getting that money today, which if you look at the weighted average value of money over time, he's getting nothing basically. Another issue that we need to contend with is when we retire and as we age, healthcare is an issue. I checked with the Caribbean Association for Retired Persons, and the health scheme, the health insurance that they're in, which they anticipate that the premiums are going to need to increase. Anybody who is a member in that society and wants to access their health insurance, the premium is $323,000 a year, Jamaican, which is about $30,000 a month. The average pensioner cannot afford that. They're not getting $30,000 a month. So with all of those fun facts, where do we go from here? Is it possible to save toward retirement still? And my case here today is yes, it is possible. You have to plan, but it is possible. Okay, so I'm sorry, there's some. All right, so in 2004, we had the passage of what was called the Pension Superannuation Funds and Retirement Schemes and Attendant Regulations. The regulations were passed in 2006. The act was in 2004. Many years before that, the only guidance that we had for pension funds, how to invest and what applied was the Pensions Act, which just was tied to tax. That basically is that whatever you put into your pension fund, which are mostly superannuation funds at the time, was monies earned prior to tax. What did the Pensions Act, the new Pensions Act in 2004 and 2006 regulations do? It increased the responsibility of trustees and sponsors. It codified certain common law practices, and it gave the Financial Services Commission the responsibility for the regulation of pension funds. The main types of pension funds, I mentioned one before, which is a defined contribution scheme, but you also have defined benefit schemes. The difference between defined contribution schemes and defined benefit schemes is that defined benefit schemes, just put it quite simply, your defined benefit scheme links your final benefit to your final pay, as opposed to the defined contribution scheme, which you only get paid whatever you put in. So with the defined benefit scheme, your employer has a responsibility post your retirement to ensure that your benefit is consistent with what you were earning prior to retirement. Now, that doesn't mean that if you get into a company and you say, for instance, are with the company for 10 years, your final payment is linked to your final pay. However, because you only work there for 10 years, that will also affect the level of your pension. So what we're finding now in Jamaica is not only do most people not belong to a pension fund, but also the final payouts tend to be way less than what you earn. So what we're looking at now is a replacement income of about 30–40%. i.e., if you're earning $10 million a year prior to retirement, when you retire, your pension is between $3 and $4 million a year. And that's based on the fact that most people don't start saving aggressively until they're in their 50s and pension issues start staring them in the face. And also, people are changing jobs a lot more now. So you're not in any one job for a long time. What people do is when you change jobs, you tend to get paid out your pension benefit as an option. We encourage people not to, because your pension is your pension and that's what you're saving towards. So don't take out your pension contributions every time you change a job. And what that does is it gives you different sources of income upon retirement. I'm trying to change these.
No, just change.
How do I do that?
We don't change. It's a delay.
It is?
It's a delay.
Oh, it has a delay? How long is the delay?
For 3 seconds.
It's been 3 seconds. So if you can show me how to change it as I speak. Can you show me how I can change it? Okay. So what is a fund versus a scheme? So a fund is basically when you work for an employer can have a, thank you very much, by the way, thanks. Yeah, an employer can have a fund for its workers. So an employer sets up its own pension fund, which is with its own trust deed and rules, and employees invest into that fund. And also as people retire, they retain membership in the fund and get a pension from the fund. That's a fund. A scheme is when, for instance, a licensed provider, either a life insurance company or an investment company, sets up a retirement scheme so that anybody who is working and has a declared source of income can invest in that fund. So it's more of a commercial entity than a superannuation fund, which is reserved for employees of specific companies. So what are the benefits of pension funds? The first and most important benefit is that your contributions are made before tax. Now that's another idiosyncrasy of Jamaica. Now what research has shown is that in first world countries, when annual tax declarations and submissions were required, pension fund contributions went up significantly. In Jamaica, it is the law that every person who has reached the age of majority is supposed to submit a tax return. Nobody does it. And so because of that, you don't have very high incentive for people to invest in pension funds, because if you're not filing taxes, then you're not paying taxes. If you're not paying taxes, then there's no benefit to contributing to a pension fund prior to tax. So as a result of that, people who are either contributor to pension schemes or pension funds tend to be employed people who are taxed at source. So when you're taxed at source, the benefit of investing in a pension plan is that you invest prior to tax. So if you make $100 and your tax rate is, say, for instance, 25%, and you contribute 10% of your income, which is $10, to your pension, then you'll only be taxed on the remaining $90 as opposed to $100. So your tax base is lower. And what you're doing is deferring tax, because when you get paid a pension, if you're over the tax threshold, you pay tax at that point. If you're under, you won't. And also anything that's invested in the fund. So when people come together and they make investments pooled into a pension fund, those assets, when invested, attract withholding tax. For pension funds don't pay withholding tax. And so your income in that fund is paid gross also. So there are several tax benefits to investing in a pension fund. And what also is an advantage is particularly if you're in a superannuation fund, and that's one of those employer-based sponsored funds, you pass on your benefits. So the trust deed and rules will have certain allowances for you to pass your benefit on, mainly to your spouse, but also you can through pension schemes, choose any beneficiary that you will. And I've been in this business for a while, and I've seen messy situations with these circumstances. Be careful who you marry. Be careful who you partner with, because there are consequences, particularly in the unfortunate event of death, particularly if minors are involved. There are instances when it is unclear who you're going to pay, in terms of who the legal spouse is. And then if that is or is not determined, what also has to determine is how the minors benefit. And if your minors are not in the care of your spouse, and if they're not declared, and we can go on and on with some technicalities, they'll be left vulnerable in the unfortunate event of your passing. So it's very important to live a responsible life. Let's just leave it there. Okay. Life expectancy is increasing. The life expectancy now in Jamaica is about what, 80 to 84 years old. But many people are living well into their 90s. And so when your life expectancy increases, that makes it even more important to have retirement savings, and also a regular income and health benefits. For most employers, when you retire from that employer, you also remain a member of their health insurance. However, there are going to be instances where you don't retire from an employer, even if you work for a company, if the company doesn't have a pension fund, or if the company, if for instance, what you do is you put money toward a pension scheme rather than a pension fund because of the unavailability of a pension fund. There are considerations that you're going to have to make about your health and how that is also going to be funded. You're going to, as people retire, your income becomes fixed. You're not able as much to work anymore, and your options become fewer. And for those of us who are able to work, it's a blessing. But for some people, they just can't. So there is going to be a loss of income. And there are also unexpected circumstances: a spouse dies, illness, disability, and death. And inflation, which I talked about, we talk about low inflation in Jamaica today of between 4 and 6%. 5% is still very high, because over time that erodes your purchasing power. So how much money will you need for retirement? It's estimated that you need about 70 to 80% of your pre-retirement income. And that assumes that it's going to remain constant over time. You're probably going to need more than that if you're going to average out 70 to 80% of what you retired at over your lifespan. So retirement savings allows you to meet your basic needs, which is food, shelter, and healthcare costs. And I mentioned already that if you plan to retire at 65 and you're 30 years old today, and your life expectancy, which even though the average life expectancy in Jamaica is 82 years old, if you are middle class, you're probably going to live longer than that. And that's because you probably are more healthy than the general population. You're going to be living probably 30 years into retirement. So that's something to consider. So what can I do to make sure that I'm prepared for retirement? Home ownership is very, 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 very important. I was not alive before NHT, I don't think. But I know that prior to NHT in Jamaica, most Jamaicans did not own property. Most Jamaicans did not have an estate to leave to their children. When my grandparents died, they had nothing. And so my parents built wealth from their generation. They're the generation that had a home, that was able to pass something on to their children. Home ownership is not to be taken lightly. It's a very important thing. The NHT has given most Jamaicans the ability to own a home and to have an estate. And I think it's something that you need to take very seriously and to pursue. Additionally, young people nowadays, we like apartments because we don't like yard work, and we don't like those kinds of things that come with, you know, owning one house. And plus there are conveniences with community living. When you're owning a home, consider a few things. One, if you own an apartment and you're getting toward retirement and you want an additional income, how are you going to do that? If you own a home that's a freestanding home and you want to add on to that home, if you want to have some kind of rental possibility, Airbnb or whatever can be attached to your home as long as you have an independent access. How are you going to accomplish that? If what you own is an apartment or a townhouse, then you're going to need additional property. As possible, but it's a consideration. So the other thing to consider is that home ownership is supposed to be pursued prior to retirement. So if you are 30 years old, 35 years old, and you're buying your first home, you have a 25-year or a 30-year mortgage. What I would encourage you to do is to pay off that home as soon as possible. What I tell people is that whenever you buy your home with your NHT benefits and your savings and the mortgage, etc., you're going to be broke. Accept that, that's a fact. You're going to be broke for a little bit, but it will end. You will earn more money, you will get pay raises, you will get another job, you will pursue your career. We're university educated people here, we have skills. We don't only have to rely on one income, we can have various sources of income. Aggressively pay off that first home. And then what you do is you do additional property investments post that home. It is possible, other people have done it before us, we can do it too. So when you get into middle age, 40s, 50s, you should be looking at adding an investment property to your portfolio. Again, when you buy that second property, you're going to be broke. Accept that. Aggressively get yourself out of that and pay it off as soon as you can. So what that does too is that it forces you to save money. So if you're not disciplined and you have a mortgage, you must pay the mortgage because you have to live somewhere, right? And you don't want anybody to take away the property that you do have. And the other things will come, the vacations, the nice clothes, the nice shoes, the jewelry, all of that will come. But when you're saving aggressively, you don't have access to that money, and that's a good thing. Some companies also have what we call ESOPs. And what is an ESOP? Is an employee saving opportunity plan. And if you work at, say, for instance, one of the banks, sometimes for their management staff, sometimes for all of their staff, they'll have a savings plan where the savings plan invests money in the company shares. And even when dividends are paid, those dividends are used to buy more shares. I encourage you to also take advantage of that, another form of forced savings. So even if you leave that company, you leave with those shares, and any dividends that is accrued to you on a quarterly, half-yearly basis, that's your income. And also health permitting, and also other circumstances permitting, work post-retirement, because most people are working long after 60 nowadays. And also you do have something to contribute. And if you just stop working and stop contributing, your mental decline, I think your prospects are not as good, and also your quality of life. So think of those things as you think toward retirement. Another practical tip for preparing for retirement. So we assume now, remember, only 20% of Jamaicans contribute to a pension plan. And the reason why it's 20% is 10% work for the government, so they have a pension plan. And then only 10% of private people have a pension scheme. Most, maybe 50% of Jamaicans work in the informal sector. No, 60% of Jamaicans work in the informal sector. And in the informal sector, pensions are not something that is focused on. And most people will tell you, your average lower middle class person will tell you that they're fighting so much to make a living that it's hard for them to even think about saving toward a pension. I have found that when you're forced to save, you save more than when you voluntarily do so. When I say force, it's either that you force yourself or the system forces you. So when you're young and you're not thinking about retirement, and you enter a company and they say, well, you know, the company will contribute 5% toward your retirement plan, which is about what companies do, and you're required to do another 5%. You do it because that's what you're required to do. You don't see the value of that until you see the value of that years later. So, and also, as we also enter these savings plans, retirement plans, we need to be cognizant of the fact that the maximum that we are allowed to contribute tax-free to a pension scheme is 20%. So there is value in saving that additional 10%. Remember, most times when a company sponsors a plan, they contribute at least 5% toward your pension scheme. So if you're going up to 20%, you're saving 15% prior to tax, which is not a lot when you think about the fact that you're taxed afterwards. So it's your pre-tax saving that you're putting into your pension scheme. So bear that in mind. Also, bear in mind the following. Most Jamaicans who get a pension nowadays get an NIS pension. You're required to pay into NIS as long as you're a working Jamaican. The more that you earn is the less significant your NIS pension is going to be. But if you're not getting a pension, $3,500 a week is a lot of money. So that's what most people are getting. That's $3,500 a week. No, okay, it's not a lot of money. $14,000 a month. Can't pay the water bill. It can pay the water bill. So, and it can at least do that. And a very wise woman, my mother once told me that getting regular money in every week, every month is better than not getting any at all. So bear that in mind. The maximum NIS pension now that you're able to get is $8,500 a week, which 9,000 times 2, sorry, 8,500, that's 17,000 times 2 is $34,000 a month. That's not bad. So that's what you're getting now with your NIS entitlement. I encourage you to also save toward that, because as you get toward retirement, think of this. You get $100,000 for a pension payout every month. You have some investment property and you get $1,000 US a month as $150,000 plus 100,000, that's 250,000. And you invested in some shares and you received maybe $60,000, $70,000, maybe $100,000 every quarter. So that's, call it $30,000 every month. So that's 30,000 plus $100,000 plus $150,000. How much that? $280,000. We're not bad. Plus your NIS, if you get NIS. Did I include that already?
Yeah.
No, the 100,000 plus the 150,000 for your rent, plus the NIS, I didn't include that yet, so that's 30,000. So it's, and the dividends, that's you over $300,000. So what is important as you get toward retirement is different sources of income. Very important. So don't scoff at the NIF because it is a benefit. And when you retire, it means something. Additionally, if you're married and there is legal marriage and also recognized common law marriage. So if you're married and your spouse dies, there's also a benefit with the NIS. So if your spouse was paying into the NIF, so you don't get NIS because you're Jamaican alone. You have to pay into the scheme. So that's something that you need to be aware of. And another government benefit, which becomes very important as we go older, is NHF, which turns into the NI Gold and JADEP upon reaching the age of 60 or 65. Now, when you get to 65, the good thing about your NHF card is that it turns automatically into an NI Gold card. And for people who are in working age, where the NHF really helps, is if you have common diseases that are non-communicable, like asthma. Some of us, unfortunately, contract lupus. And I think there's one more for young people. I can't think of it now. But those drugs are covered under NHF. And you get paid up to 80% of the prescription value. And that card is swiped at your pharmacy and you don't have to pay that money and you don't have to worry yourself about it. Also, plug for the NHF here. They're the most efficient government service that I've come in contact with. You go into the office to register and they apologize when it takes 15 minutes because that's a long time to them. You go into a bank to open an account, it takes 3 hours. So it's very efficient if you need to change your status. Say, for instance, as you get older, you get your little diabetes or you get your little hypertension, and you have to go in and submit that yellow form that says, no, I'm getting older. 10 minutes, you're in and out and you're covered. Now, as you get older, 65 and older, your NHF card, which becomes your NI Gold card, also covers doctor's visits. I wrote notes here. It covers hospitalization. If you get hospitalized, $1,000 a day, but it's something. Surgical, and surgical includes anesthesiology costs, doctor's visits, diagnostic procedures, which are your scans, your x-rays, ultrasounds, that type of thing, prescribed drugs, dental and optical. So there are several benefits with the NI Gold as you get older. And JADEP, that qualifies you for certain drugs. You basically pay nothing, between $200 and $400 for a month's supply of drugs, which is significant when you're on a fixed income. And as you retire, I also recommend, because most of us pay into NHT as a part of our employment arrangement, and we forget that we're entitled to refunds. Very important. So, and this is also important as you go into investment properties. So you will be paying into NHF post your first home, and you will be entitled to those refunds What I encourage you to do is to make those refunds build up and only use the refund to buy a next house or to sink into a mortgage payment so that it builds your home ownership. And remember that as people of color and as people who are progressive, building an estate for the next generation is very important. That's what people really fought for in our country, to make sure that we had the right to vote and that we had the right to own property. There was a time when you couldn't vote in Jamaica unless you own property. I know Black people never own property, so therefore we never vote. So we need to vote, we need to earn money to actually invest in property, and we also need to consider for our children, this is a personal plug, leaving an estate so that they can build on that in their generation. And that, my friends, is how I suggest that we consider retirement and providing for a retirement.
So we want to thank Mrs. Robinson Longmore for that engaging presentation with tips on how to plan a sustainable retirement and looking at ways of generating income for that point or that period in life. Thank you very much. I invite Ms. Rihanna Mino, another student here at the Norman Manley Law School Legal Aid Clinic, to move the vote of thanks. But before she does, I need to find out if there are any questions from our audience that you may want to raise based on the presentation that was made this morning. Do we have any questions from our no questions from our YouTube channel? Sure. Go ahead.
I started out in thank you. That's when we started having legal experts and also investment experts focusing on pension funds. Now, pension funds involve the admin side, which is to make sure that everybody who has an interest in the fund is properly protected. So the members of the fund are the employer and the active contributors, the deferred pensioners, and the pensioners. And there's also the investment side. So you have the pool of assets that need to be invested. And you have investment regulations, which guide those investments. And you also have investment standards, which is how I became a CFA, as to how you best invest assets to properly provide for the purpose of that asset. So you have, for instance, endowment funds, which are not the same as pension funds, and you invest them differently. And we had professionals coming into the industry. I had people that I interviewed who knew nothing about pensions. Them just used to hear it as a foreign concept. And those people who worked with me and trained 20 years ago, some of them are not here. They're in Canada working in pensions as professionals. It's an area that you can consider for professional development and also contribution going forward. And it is an interesting area in that it's always changing. When you look at pension funds, regulations change, but at the PIAJ and in different industries around the world, people really push for pension funds to provide for people in retirement and also to be relevant. And I saw the relevance of pension fund, properly investing pension funds. I remember when we first had those regulations coming into force, and I took over some pension funds. We had pension funds that were only invested in repos, earning the very minimum in terms of a return. We had pension funds that were doing all kinds of things like lending to some people that really ought not to be borrowers. And what the regulations did is it protected members of funds from that type of misuse of funds. So I encourage it's an area that doesn't get a lot of attention but deserves it. And the closer you get to retirement is the more relevant it becomes. So thank you.
Good morning. On behalf of the Norman Manley Law School, I extend our heartfelt gratitude to you for your enlightening presentation. Your expertise as a chartered financial analyst and your experience in pension fund management have provided us with invaluable insights into the importance of planning for the future. You've highlighted the critical role of creating a solid pension plan and the importance of disciplined saving to ensure financial security and a livable income in retirement. Your message has made it clear to all of us that preparing for retirement starts now and requires thoughtful action to avoid the challenges of old age, poverty. As a token of our appreciation, we are pleased to present you with a gift from the Norman Manley Law School. It acts as a small gesture to show you that we really appreciate your time, wisdom, and impactful words. So thank you again, Mrs. Longmore, for inspiring us to prioritize saving, planning, and preparing for a sustainable financial future. And thank you all for being here today. Thank you.
So I know we did the vote of thanks and opened the floor for questions, but we have a new member of our audience just joining us, and she has a question which she wants to raise. So Mrs. Longmore, I hope that you don't mind answering the question at this stage. What's the question? Or you don't want it to be a public question? Okay. Well,
Thank you. Yes, I think you made a great point when you mentioned how elderly people like your father, who you used as an example, are receiving basically little to nothing in their pension because it hasn't changed or it hasn't increased along with the inflation. Oh, he has received increase.
They're going for just defined contribution schemes. So we're really going to see the effect of that change in 30 years' time when, I mean, my father would have received those incremental increases from government pensions over time, which is the GOJ pension over time, which is not much, but it's more than nothing. But most people retiring now won't see any increase in their pension payments over their lifetime.
Yes, I was just going to ask, what do you think can be done, if anything, to help those people, because they've spent their entire lives working, dedicated their lives, and then when they retire, they receive little to nothing. And I've seen it personally as well, and I wonder how they survive. Guess they have to depend on family or friends. But I was just going to ask, what do you think can be done, if anything, so that we don't leave those elderly people behind?
Okay, thanks for the question. A couple of things. Don't rely solely on your pension. The NIS, from your accent, you're not Jamaican, right? Okay, so you would probably have a government sponsored scheme like the NIS there too. So that increases over time. It's not much, but it increases. If you have property and you maintain your property is something that retains its value in US dollar terms. So I encourage you as an investment property to invest in properties from which you can get a US dollar rent. So Airbnb or a property in the right area that you can get some form of US income from it, because that provides you with some stability and a hedge against inflation. And this is the CFA in me talking now, not the pension person. What I've also done is you borrow in local currency, you save in foreign. So if your local currency is a currency that is declining in value, it is best to borrow in that currency. And if you're investing, no, when you're investing in hard currency, you also need to be careful, because what you don't want is to get involved with an investment house that has a sales target that just, encourage you to invest a certain way. Do your research, know what you're investing in. Like, I work with people now who are very into Bitcoin. I've also worked with people that were very into Olint and other things. I don't invest in anything that I don't understand. I understand Amazon. I understand pharmaceuticals. I understand. All right. So there is a case in investing for doing fundamental analysis. So understanding the fundamentals of a company is very important when you're investing in it. And a friend of mine also told me once that if you like something, invest in it. So if you're always shopping on Amazon, if you're always shopping on Shein, if you're always shopping Fenty products or whatever, there is something there. Look at those investments rather than investments that can't be quite explained. I'm not saying it's not good, but I personally don't understand Bitcoin. I don't understand where the value comes from. So if somebody can explain that to me, I'll invest in it, but I need to understand it first. So try not to get into the return part before you understand the fundamental of what you're investing in. So there is real estate, there is US dollar investments, there is borrowing in local currency. Now, over time, the Jamaican currency has become more stable. So there may be more of a case now for investing more locally. Also, what I encourage you to think of, Jamaica and Belize has 3 million people, right? World has 8 billion. It's a big world out there. So if you invest in international types of opportunities, you're probably better hedged than if you invest solely in a local market. And what I've also encouraged people to do is the best investment that I've made over time is in my education. It gives you the opportunity to work internationally. It gives you the opportunity to explore internationally. And as you age, that has a lot of value. So that's how you work toward. And people who are already in the situation where you're at the cusp of retirement or you've retired and you're looking at 30 years down the road, what I encourage you to do is look at what you have in your hand. So if what you have is a house, how can that house work for you? If what you have is land, how can that land work for you? If what you have is a pension and 4 children, how that can work for you, because there's value in remittances, even though we don't want to pressure our children. So that's how I encourage you to think creatively and also take advantage of every single government benefit that you have. So if you have that NI Gold, if you have that health insurance, take advantage of all of those benefits, because as you age, those become more critical. So I hope you have answered your questions.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Are there any other questions? I want to say thank you very much, because that was, from that question, we got some free investment advice. So thank you particularly for that, Mrs. Robinson Longmore. All right, I think that brings us to the end of our first session for today. We continue at, it's now 11:30, so we continue at 11:35 with our second presentation of the day. So please join us then.